Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So good evening, everyone. Today we're starting a different series. We're going to talk a little bit about Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. So these are the two, we call them Agasavakas of the Buddha. And so these are the highest disciples of the Buddha. But they didn't start out as highest disciples. Of course, like everybody else, they started out as young children. So both of them were born near to the village or near to the town of Rajagaha. Venerable Sariputta, actually, the name of his village is given differently in different commentaries. So in some places it's called, the village is named Upatissa, and that is also his maiden, that's also the name that he was given as a young man. Now, Sariputta comes from the name of his mother. His mother's name was Rupasari. And then on the same day he was born, another boy was born named Kolita. And so actually the village is also called Kolita, according to the commentaries. And so they were both in this area near to Rajagaha, which, if you know, is somewhere south of the Ganges River, south of Pataliputta. It was the capital of Magadha at that time. And um, so they grew up in good families. Good family means that they had a comfortable life. And so, like most young men, they would enjoy to go to a nice festival. So it seems that one time there was an annual festival in Rajagaha that we translate as the Hilltop Festival. So you can imagine what kinds of entertainments there might have been in a festival in ancient India. I think some of the kinds of dancing you might see in a Bollywood film in modern day, the kinds of singing and instruments, some of them are still used in India today. They had various kinds of acrobats also. So there's a sutta that talks about bamboo pole acrobats, where they would have two people balancing. One person would hold a bamboo pole, and the other one would balance on top of it. And so we have different kinds of balancing acts. Maybe there'd be juggling. Maybe there'd be fire breathing. This was sort of all of these sort of entertaining things. Clapping. They would have, instead of having, they wouldn't just have drums. They had other kinds of percussion like clapping and slapping against the body. Probably people doing cartwheels and backflips, and maybe they had some kinds of exaggerated dramas. And so then on the first day of the festival, uh, young Upadisa and young Kolita, they were quite impressed. So they were enjoying the festival a lot. Um, and then the second day also, they continued to enjoy it. On the third day, something changed. And so then they asked each other, your face has changed today. You're not enjoying this kind of ceremony, this kind of festival as you were, same way you were before. So what's changed? And so they confessed to each other. Both of them were thinking this kind of pleasure is empty. So if we just pursue this kind of pleasure our whole life, just wasting our days, watching the festivals, then we'll never know any kind of deeper happiness. We'll never know some kind of deeper liberation. So this is an interesting situation because it's something that a lot of teenagers have even today. So you can see even back to ancient times, at a certain point in our lives, we start to think, well, what's our life about? So if I continue to live my life in this way, then how will it end up when I'm 80, 90 years old? And so they weren't doing anything really bad at that time, but they started to think, well, this is a bit of a hollow kind of pleasure. And so in ancient India, it was pretty easy just to go off and become a monk or a nun. Essentially, you just walk out from town and sometimes you tell your parents, sometimes you didn't, um, because there were so many different kinds of monks and nuns. So at that time, they heard of one teacher called Sanjaya Balattaputta. And so there's a group of teachers that were very famous in the Buddhist day. Probably in modern day, amongst them, the most famous is Nikantanataputta, who was the leader of one of the Jain sects at the time. And so this was a different sect. So they went and they studied with him, and they were not that satisfied, but they were quite talented young men, and they both gained a following of 250 uh, other ascetics. So before we continue with this story, maybe we'd have like a brief overview of what religion was like in the time of the Buddha. So we had a few different kinds of religions. One of the groups we call the Paribhajikas, so the wanderers. And so this is more like what Upatissa and Kolita were doing. So they were wandering around and doing some meditation. They had the Achalikas. So these ones were people practicing in more austere ways. So the Achalikas, they would practice completely naked. And so if you've never been to northern India, the weather is not that different from, say, for example, Sydney. So you could get quite hot summers, but winters could be very cold. And sometimes snow would fall even. And so they would be completely naked. So they had to be extremely physically tough. And you also had what they call Jatilas. The Jatilas, we call uh, I'm not sure, I've forgotten the translation, but these are ascetics who would go around they would have dreadlocks. So this would be like the fire worshipping ascetics that the Buddha met, the Kassapa brothers. So this was like the Buddha's first very large conversion of established ascetics. And then he preached the fire sermon, and they were able to attain nibbana at that time. We haven't quite got there yet in the Buddha's life, but so those are the Jatilas. So amongst these groups, so then we have this venerable. Oh, so then we also had the Brahmins. So the Brahmins were hereditary priests, but at the time of the Buddha, they had given up a lot of their priestly sort of duties. And so they had the Vedic religion. And the Vedic religion is a very complicated series of sacrifices that are meant to sort of manipulate the natural world and lead to good rebirth in future lives. So, for example, you can see in Varanasi in the present day, they have what they call the burning ghats. So the ghats are these sort of fort areas along the river Ganges, and in the burning ghats, people will uh, they put the corpses out onto the river for cremation, and they're a very complicated set of rituals that they should perform in order to get a good rebirth for that person. And so some of them can be quite expensive. So, for example, if somebody dies from snake bite, they might have to do a certain kind of ritual, but if it's a natural death, they may have to do a different kind of ritual. So, in the Buddhist time, the Brahmins had partly given up this Vedic religion, or some of the Brahmins had partly given it up. Some of them were following them, they were studying the Vedas, and others were farmers or they were tradesmen and things like that, but they would keep the lineage and the clan. So, at that time, there was a series of 10 issues that normally all of the teachers would try to answer. And if you were to go to one of these groups, so whether they be Achalikas or Paribhajikas, like so if they're naked ascetics or they're dreadlocked ascetics or they're just wanderers or whomever, you could ask this set of 10 questions. Uh, so I will so we'll just go through some of them here. According to Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, we're looking at the Samanya Pala Sutta. It's Digha Nikaya 2. The translation's from suttacentral.net. And so these are the ways that Sanjaya Velataputta would answer these questions. So one of them is there a world beyond? Okay, so that's one of the questions. Is there no world beyond? Is it that there is both is and is not a world beyond? Is it that there neither is nor is not a world beyond? So we're talking about future lives here. Are there beings who have taken rebirth? Are there no beings who've taken rebirth? Is it that both and there are and are not beings who've taken rebirth? And so going on about the fruit and result of good and bad actions, and the questions about the Tathagata, does the Tathagata exist after death? And so we have these, we call it tetralemma. So usually they would say, for example, if you can say, is Dhamsuwa Monastery in Sydney? Then the answer should either be, yes, it is in Sydney. No, it's not in Sydney. It's both in Sydney and not in Sydney, and or it's neither in Sydney nor not in Sydney. So we know it's not in Sydney, right? It's in Melbourne. So it fits this, what we call a tetralemma. So we have the four possibilities for the answer to the question, according to ancient Indian logic. And so these are questions that the Buddha actually wouldn't address these questions. And so this is an interesting issue for another day. So what they call Sanjaya Balattaputta a radical skeptic. And it means he wouldn't answer the questions, but the Buddha, when he would say to set aside the questions, and he would say, this is not what my religion's about. So my teaching is not about this. My teaching is about learning to overcome suffering and what is good and evil in the world, these sorts of things. But Sanjaya Balattaputta would say, regarding any of these questions, if I thought that it was so, I would declare to you, it is so. But I do not say it is this way, nor it is that way, nor it is otherwise. I do not say it is not so, nor do I say it is not so. So, so this is what they would call the eel wrigglers, because they would wriggle out of any question. They would say, I don't know. I don't say I know. I don't say it's not so. I don't say it's not so. And so finally you come out, we're completely confused. So finally, what are you saying? You're saying nothing. So why am I coming to you as a teacher? And so if you don't sound too satisfied, if you don't feel too satisfied with that teaching, well, neither did Koli to Upatissa. So they made a pact with each other. They said, let's go off around this Jambudipa. So Jambudipa means India, but in this sense, it can mean the whole world, because Jambudipa was the whole inhabited world for them. So for the people of that time. So they went off wandering, looking for a teacher within this Jambudipa, somebody who could lead them to enlightenment. And while they were wandering, Venerable Sariputta went to Rajagaha, and one morning he saw Venerable Asaji, Arahant Asaji, going for alms round. And the way he was walking, his demeanor was very inspiring for him, for young Upatissa. He thought, this person is not like other people. Now remember, he'd been associating with the other paribhajikas, the other different wandering ascetics for some time already. He was even the leader of 250 of them. So he had some experience with different kinds of religious people. So he saw something special in Venerable Asaji. He realized it's not the proper time to ask him a question, because he's going for alms round now. Also, I'll wait until after alms round to ask him a question. So he goes to him, and it's a very famous exchange that he has. So we'll quote it from Venerable Ananda Jyoti's translation. This is from the Vinaya Mahavagga. So we were following this earlier when we were talking about the Buddha's enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. So this is a little bit after that, the story of Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana. So this is Venerable Sari. This is young Upatissa asking Venerable Asaji. Your faculties, friend, are very clear. Purified is your skin and bright. On account of whom, friend, did you go forth? Who is your teacher? What Dhamma do you prefer? And then the answer, there is, friend, a great ascetic, a Sakyan son who has gone forth from the Sakya family. On account of that fortunate one, I went forth. That fortunate one is my teacher. That fortunate one's Dhamma I prefer. And then Upatissa asks, but what is the doctrine of this venerable's teacher? What does he say? The answer, I am new, friend, when not long gone forth, recently come to this Dhamma and Vinaya. I'm not able to teach the Dhamma at length, but I can explain the meaning to you in brief. Then he answers, speak little or much, but tell the meaning to me. The meaning is useful to me. What to do with many words? So he's very direct with him. He's tired of sort of this. You can see if the way his teacher answered him before, this very sort of long-winded answer. Oh, I don't say yes, I don't say no, I don't say not no, I don't say not no. So he's like, what good is this kind of answer? Please just give it to me straight. Then he spoke this verse. Whatever things have a cause, the cause by the realized one has the cause the realized one has told, and also that which is their sation. Such is the great ascetic's doctrine. So we'll just quote it in Pali because it's a very famous verse. Then a lot of people choose to memorize this verse. Ye dhamma hetupabhava te sanghetun tathagato aha te sanchayo nirodho evang vadi mahasamanoti. And so then Venerable Sariputta attains to Sotapanna, stream entry. So he has this, what they're calling the dust-free, stainless vision of Dhamma. So in Pali, we say Virajang Vitamalang Dhamma Chakung Dapari. So the stainless, dustless Dhamma eye opened in Upatissa, young Upatissa. Yang Kinchi Sumuriya Dhammang Sabbantang Nirodha Dhammanti. So whatever Dhamma, whatever phenomena have arise, they also will cease. And then so this is showing Venerable Sariputta's great wisdom that even before he went forth, he's gone forth, but he hasn't ordained yet. Just by hearing this short teaching, he's able to understand and attain the Dhamma-eye, the same way that Venerable Anya Kondanya has attained in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And so Venerable Sariputta has given some inspired verses here. And he asks about, he's going to ask about the Buddha and where to find him. But first he has to go and meet Venerable this Kolita, who will become Mahamoggallana later. And so he goes to him, and Mahamoggallana also realizes that Upatissa doesn't look the same as he did before. Remember in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, one of the ways that the Buddha was able to convince the group of 5 ascetics that he had attained was by saying, look how I'm talking in a different way than before. You can see that earlier I never claimed any attainment, but now I have. And it seems that in the immediate sort of aftermath of somebody attaining Nibbana, sometimes there's this appearance, a change in their appearance, their skin becomes bright, they say. It's quite common in the Vinaya Mahavagga. You can see the Buddha is walking along and people comment on his skin. Even the one The one person sees the Buddha and he says, "Oh, what are you? Are you a deva? Are you a human?" Because his appearance was sort of so stately. And now, so when Mahamoggallana sees him, surely you've attained the deathless. So is it true? And Upatissa says, yes, it's true. And so he repeats the same verse that Venerable Asaji told him. And then Kolita was able to attain stream entry as well. Now, this this is a very important point because one of the times that it's possible to attain Nibbana is when listening to the Dhamma. It's one of the occasions for attaining Nibbana. And so we listen to the Dhamma respectfully and try to understand it, think about the meaning of it. Now, maybe our parami are not as good as Upatissa or Kolita, but maybe we can still get some benefit from it. And it's still possible to attain, even though, notice that at that time, Upatissa was only a stream enterer. Typically, when this happens, it's actually the Buddha instructing somebody because the Buddha had certain psychic powers, certain special kind of power to see the faculties of beings, to understand their spiritual abilities. And so he could understand the state of their mind as he was giving a talk and see how it was changing. And so usually he would give them a talk to develop some kind of faith. And then when their mind became very pure and ready to understand the deeper Dhamma, then he would preach the Four Noble Truths to them. And then they could attain Nibbana. In this case, Venerable Sariputta, who's still Upatissa, then he was not an Arahant. And he didn't have such psychic powers just by merely repeating the verse. But it seems that Kolita had a lot of faith in his friend because they'd been practicing for a long time. So perhaps his mind was already quite concentrated and filled with faith, so he was prepared to hear the teaching and understand it. So the two of them then approach the Buddha, and when the Buddha sees them, he says to the other monks, these two monks will be my foremost disciples, my left and right-handed disciples, they say. And so uh, we have some story about how they attain. Uh, it took 2 weeks for Venerable Sariputta to attain arahantship, and it took 1 week for Mahamoggallana to attain arahantship. So Mahamoggallana had some kind of sleepiness, a difficulty with sleepiness, and then the Buddha gave him meditation on the elements. And so maybe next talk we'll talk a little bit about that. And then Venerable Sariputta, so that this when they meet the Buddha, they're given the Ehi Bhikkhu going forth. So the Buddha gave them a very simple kind of ordination, we'll say, without explaining in detail. And so Venerable Sariputta took 2 weeks to attain arahantship. And so we have some details about his practice. One of the suttas is called Diganaka Sutta. So his cousin was Diganaka, and Diganaka was a Jatila. So one of these ascetics with the long dreadlocks. Sort of Diganaka means long nails. So maybe he had grown his fingernails very long as some kind of an ascetic practice. So I think we won't go into those stories today. But I think it's worth trying to look at the teaching that they received and thinking about it a little bit, like how we can apply it for ourselves in our own meditation. So we have this, maybe I'll read it again, the verse by Venerable Asaji. Whatever things have a cause and a source, their cause the Blessed One has told, and also that which is their cessation, such is the great ascetics doctrine. And so then this is the verse that he spoke. And then this is what Venerable Sariputta realized. Whatever has the nature of arising, all that has the nature of ceasing. So this is simple and complicated. So we have whatever has arisen due to causes, the Buddha has told the causes, and also the cessation. And so this is dependent origination. So if you look at what we talked about earlier, when the Buddha was practicing under the Bodhi tree on the night before of his awakening, before he had attained to, before he had become a Buddha, when he was still merely a Bodhisattva. And so he attained very deep states of concentration. And then he saw the way that karma worked. So he saw the arising and passing of other beings according to their karma. And he remembered his own past lives. And he also reflected on this Paticca. So we have Avinja Pachya Sankhara, Sankhara Pachya Vinyanam. So we have the 12 links of dependent origination, starting with avidya, which means ignorance. And so he contemplates them in forward and reverse order. So when one of them arises, or when one of them leads to the other, and also there's like a simultaneous influencing of them, and it's actually can be quite a complicated process. But you can see that we have the cause, and then we have the cessation of the cause. And so whatever has the nature of arising, has the nature of passing, um, is we can say that it's related to this process of dependent arising, but Upatissa has not realized it fully yet. So if we want to take this aspect of anicca to in a practical way in our meditation practice, we have a few different ways. One of the ways is to contemplate the six sense bases, and another way is to contemplate the four elements in the body. So since we've talked a little bit about the four elements in the body, maybe we can use this method, or we can talk about this method a little bit. So we have four elements, and then we have what we say is derived, or the materials that are derived of the four elements. And this is what constitutes the body in the Buddhist sense of the word. So we have this Patavi Dhatu, so we have the earth element. And so then usually the definition is something like what is earth, earthy, and clung to. And then the examples given are like hair on your head, hair on your body, nails, teeth, skin, bones, these things in your body that are sort of solid. And so this is one way to contemplate them. And so then similarly, we have the apo dhatu, so we have the water element. And so then they're often defined in the same way, those things that are water, watery, and clung to. Clung to means that you sort of have an attachment towards them. Even if you become an arahant, it's true, then you won't have attachment to these things anymore. But other people can still have attachment to them. So other people, you can see examples where there's attractive young nuns, then people become attracted to their bodies, even though the nun herself has already attained arahantship. So we have this aspect of being clung to. And so for the fire element, and so the examples that we get are things like blood or saliva or pus. And so any kind of watery things in the body, we can think of, you can think of cerebral spinal fluid, any kind of fluid you can think of in the body, anything. So then we have the tejo dhatu. So this is the warmth element. And so we have things like, traditionally we talk about things like the digestive fire, but you can think of any part of the body that's warm, or the aspect of the body that allows the body to warm up in a cold, when it's cold. That is the heat element. And so then we have we have the air element. And so then this is like, for example, when we're speaking, we have air coming up through our esophagus. And when we're breathing, the air is moving through our lungs. And the various sorts of cavities in the body can also be counted under the air element. Sometimes they're come into the space element, depending on how we're dividing the body. So when we look at if we're taking the different parts of the body and we're contemplating them in our minds, usually we can take a few of them. Maybe we want to we want to just contemplate the earth element in terms of parts of the body. And so we can start by so there are different ways. First, usually we try to get some kind of concentration. So we can focus on a few of them. One way to do it, for example, is to choose one like bones. So you can focus on the bones in the body. You can scan the body from the soles of the feet to the top of the head again and again, repeating the word bones, bones. And then slowly, as you practice this way, in the mind's eye, the skeleton will start to appear. At first, it won't be so clear. At first, you'll just be feeling some kind of sensations throughout the body, and then the mind will wander off. But repeatedly, if you bring the mind to the bones in the body, thinking bones, bones, and sometime later, you may experience a sort of a flash of light, and inside that flash of light, there'll be an image of a piece of your shin bone. And it'll be there for a minute or two. Then again, the internal mental screen will go black again. And then again, you can go back to scanning the body bones, bones. And sometime later, uh, the skeleton might start to become clear in the body. And also, as it becomes clear, there might be a sense that it's a very hard thing. And so, focusing this way can understand about the bones in the body. And if the skeleton starts to become clear in the mind and it starts to glow white color, and the mind might start to become calm. If the mind has become calm, it's possible to contemplate about these causes and effects. So uh, if your mind doesn't have some degree of calm, it's quite difficult to use thinking and reflection in your meditation to develop wisdom. But once the mind becomes calm on any object, whether it's contemplating the qualities of the Buddha or contemplating your breath, then you're able to develop wisdom by reflecting in the ways that the Buddha has advised us to. So here we're talking about the origination and cessation of the body, of the four elements in the body. And so there's some definitions, sort of standard pericopes, we call them, sort of phrases that the Buddha uses to describe this for the body. So some of the aspects the Buddha mentions, this body is born from mother and father. It's built up from rice and curries. It's subject to sickness. It's subject to being pushed around. It's subject to hunger and thirst. It's subject to aging, and eventually it will pass away. And so there are various aspects that the body is subject to. And so then we have the cause. We have various kinds of causes. So one kind of cause of our body uh, are the ones certain kinds are the ones we mentioned. So it's been born from mother and father. So because of our parents' intentions and our own karma, we were born into this life. It's also been sustained by our own efforts and also through like the physical situation. So by food and by shelter and by taking medicine, then this body has been sustained. And eventually, and then no matter what kind of karma you have, having been born as a human, you'll have to pass away. It might be sooner, it might be later, but it's the nature of human bodies that they have to age and pass away. Certain classes of beings, they don't age. So certain kinds of devas, they don't really age, but they also still have to pass away eventually um, from their state. And so then if the mind has already become calm from focusing either on the skeleton or some part of the body, we can start to contemplate how these elements in our body change over the course of our lifespan. So we can think about um, or maybe it's easier to think of the body as a whole than to think about what it's like to be in the womb, for example. Maybe it's very hot in there, not much space to move. And then sort of the pain of childbirth coming into the world and these blinding lights and taking the first gasp of air. And then all of a sudden you're no longer nourished through the blood of your mother. Then from that time on, subject to hunger and thirst and things like this. And then after some time, uh, growing up into childhood, And then the body starts to get larger and mature. And then together with that, you have different kinds of experiences, start to make friends and go to school. And then sometime later, maybe you've grown up and you've gotten married. Maybe your body is very strong and healthy, and you have a good job. And then sometime later, then you start to get some arthritis, and eventually you start to get towards old age. Then the body starts to break down in various ways. The skin starts to change in color, it starts to sag, and then eventually you pass away. So it's important to have a kind of strong, certain level of concentration before you do this kind of contemplation. Otherwise, you can start to get depressed. So this is like one way of contemplating impermanence. The theme of impermanence is anicca, and also the causes. Because if you don't understand the causes of impermanence, then you won't really get the proper result from your meditation. If you just focus on your physical body and you understand, okay, all of the sensations in the body arising and passing, it's true, a certain kind of wisdom will arise, but a certain context, a greater context is sort of lost there. Now, the Buddha also recommends that we contemplate externally. So other people have the same kind of situation that we do. So everything that arises due to a cause, then that cause has been told by the Blessed One, and then also its cessation. So all of these things that are arising, they pass away. So we can contemplate. We don't have to necessarily contemplate people, inanimate objects. We can also contemplate. So we're focusing more towards the earth element because it can be a little bit difficult to contemplate, for example, how the air element changes in our body over the course of a lifespan. So if focusing more on the earth element, how these sort of solid things start to change. We can focus also externally on inanimate objects. For example, you can see behind me there are bricks. And so we can contemplate the process um, by which these bricks were made. And so the different ways that the clay was made, sort of, if you know something about geology, how the silica was laid down in the ground, whatever. And then later how the mud has been dug up and washed, and then the clay has been fired in a kiln or whatever in a big oven or something and prepared, and then the different bricks have been laid with mortar, and then sometime later, due to exposure to the heat and the cold and the sun, maybe they start to crack, um, and they start to change, right? So you can see in the ancient Buddhist sites, for example, bricks last a long time. So a brick might last 2,000 years, but you see they don't have the shiny glaze that the bricks here have. So they don't look the same way they did 2,000 years ago. And 30,000 years in the future, again, they might just be sand, or they might be part of clay, or maybe they've been mixed into concrete. Somebody has scooped up that sand and then mixed it into with some cement, and they've made concrete or something like that. So we have this kind of a process. We have different kinds of causes and conditions, and as the conditions change, then the whole phenomena changes along with it. So contemplating this way, we're trying to we're trying to understand the changes in our lives in a way that makes our mind more stable. So remember, when we do these contemplations, we're trying to develop wholesome mind states, not unwholesome mind states. So if you find this kind of contemplation not helpful, then maybe you're not ready for it yet. Maybe it's better just to focus on the breathing. But since this is the kind of contemplation that led Venerable Sariputta to attain a stream entry, just it's arising and passing, I thought maybe we could look at one way of taking this as our object. Now, again, with the four elements, we can taking them as the 32 parts of the body is only one aspect of it. It's also possible to look at the four elements as they manifest in the body right now. And so in that case, then we can look at the earth element in terms of its 6 characteristics. So hardness, softness, roughness, smoothness, heaviness, lightness. So we can try to feel these sensations as they're rising and passing in our body right now. We can try to feel the heat and cold as it rises and passes in our body right now. The flow and cohesion as the different areas are, as it changes throughout the body right now, and the pushing and supporting aspects, the motion in our body, the vibrations as they're rising and passing right now. We can also see the different kinds of causes and conditions there. So, for example, if our body stays still for a long time, then heat might build up on the seat. If it's cold outside, then maybe our head or our shoulders become cold, but the lower part of the body stays warm and things like this. So there are a lot of things that we can observe in the present moment, and we can also observe interactions that's rising and passing there. So it's very helpful to take the 4 elements as meditation object at some point in your meditation career. But as I said before, it's better to have some level of stability of your mind before you start. So next talk, we're going to continue a little bit with our examination of the Dhamma practice of Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana. Until then, I wish all of you may be happy, healthy, peaceful, and content, and swiftly attain the peace of Nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.